July 8th, 2026, and if you were near the Strait of Hormuz last night, you didn't need a radar scope to know something was happening. You just needed eyes. Because CENTCOM went in and, in one sustained operation, hit more than 80 targets across Iran's coastline. And buried in that number is a line that should stop you in your tracks. Over 60 Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps small boats. Gone. Not damaged. Not mission killed. Gone. That's not a strike package, that's a fleet erasure event, and the wildest part is why this happened. It wasn't some out-of-the-blue escalation. Iran hit 3 commercial ships in the Strait over a 24-hour window. A Qatari-owned LNG carrier, a Saudi-flagged supertanker, and a third vessel. And within hours, the U.S. answer arrived across the entire western coastline of Iran facing that waterway. Air defense systems, command and control nodes, coastal radar, anti-ship missile capability. And then that number that's breaking the internet right now. 60-plus fast boats belonging to the IRGC Navy, the same Mosquito fleet that's been swarming and harassing tankers in that strait for months, just erased from the order of battle in a single night. So today we're breaking down exactly how this happened, what triggered it, what Iran's already thrown back in response, and why this moment might be the one that finally tells us whether that ceasefire from last month actually means anything. And stick around for the global roundup, because there's a NATO angle to this story too that almost nobody's talking about. Let's rewind, because the sequence matters here, like it always does. On July 7th, 2 tankers got hit almost back-to-back in the strait. First was the Al-Rekayat, a Qatari-owned liquefied natural gas carrier, struck by a projectile that started a fire in the engine room. And when you're talking about an LNG carrier, an engine room fire isn't just a shipping delay, that's a this thing could go up like a Roman candle situation. Then the Wedian, a Saudi-flagged supertanker, took damage as well. Neither government came out and pointed the finger definitively, but Iranian state media didn't exactly rush to deny it either, and less than 24 hours later, a third vessel got hit by the IRGC. 3 ships, 1 waterway, 1 very obvious pattern. So how did Washington answer? Not with a symbolic slap. CENTCOM said forces struck Iranian air defense systems, command and control networks, coastal radar sites, anti-ship missile capabilities, and more than 60 IRGC small boats in and around the strait, specifically to degrade Iran's ability to keep threatening commercial shipping in that corridor. More than 80 targets total. That's not a proportional tit for tat. That's the U.S. military basically saying, you want to keep playing games with tankers full of civilians? Fine, we're going to make sure you don't have the boats to do it with anymore. And in typical fashion, the Treasury Department didn't sit this one out either. They reimposed sanctions on Iranian oil exports, the same sanctions that had been waived as part of the ceasefire deal signed last month. So you've got a military and an economic lever getting pulled at the exact same time. That's not an accident. That's a full-spectrum response. Iran, being Iran, wasn't going to just eat that quietly. The IRGC said it launched missiles and drones at U.S. military sites across Bahrain and Kuwait, reportedly targeting more than 80 sites in a joint Navy-Air Force operation, including facilities near where the U.S. Fifth Fleet operates out of Bahrain and Ali al-Salam Air Base in Kuwait. Sirens went off in both countries. Kuwait's military confirmed it was responding to incoming missile and drone threats. And Iran's foreign ministry, right on schedule, accused the U.S. of being the one who broke the agreement first by pulling that sanctions waiver. So here we are, a ceasefire that's supposed to still technically be in effect, getting stress tested by both sides in the same 48-hour window. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. 60 small boats. That doesn't sound as dramatic as a bunker-buster crater or a downed fighter jet. But if you understand how Iran has actually been fighting this entire war, you understand why this is one of the most significant single strikes of the whole conflict. Iran's conventional Navy and Air Force got gutted early in this war. President Trump has said as much repeatedly that the campaign against Iran wiped out a huge chunk of Iran's conventional naval capability. But conventional warships were never really the threat in the Strait of Hormuz. The threat has always been the swarm. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of small, cheap, fast IRGC boats that can dart out from hidden coves and inlets, fire an RPG or a missile at a tanker's bridge, drop a limpet mine, or just harass a crew into turning back. You can't really blockade with a navy that doesn't exist anymore, but you absolutely can terrorize a shipping lane with 100 guys on jet ski-sized boats who don't care if they come back. That's exactly what's been happening for months. Remember the Sanmar Herald taking gunfire from Iranian gunboats despite having clearance to pass. Remember the Epaminondas getting hit with gunfire and RPGs after being told it was clear. Remember the mine-laying campaign, the mine layers that got hit back in March. This has always been an asymmetric campaign fought boat by boat, mine by mine, drone by drone, because Iran doesn't have the assets left to fight it any other way. So when CENTCOM says it hit more than 60 of those boats in a single operation, What they're really saying is, we just took a massive bite out of the only tool you have left to actually threaten this waterway. That's not incremental damage. That's structural damage to Iran's entire remaining strategy in the Strait. Let's talk about how you actually pull off a strike like this, because taking out 60-plus small, fast, dispersed boats in one night is not the same problem as hitting a fixed bunker or a static radar dish. Small boats like the IRGC uses are typically kept dispersed, tucked into coves along the Hormozgan coastline, hidden near piers on islands like Keshem and Larak, sometimes camouflaged right up against civilian fishing fleets to make targeting them politically messy. Hitting dozens of them in a single coordinated window means you needed real-time or near real-time intelligence on where those boats were actually staged that night, not stale imagery from a week ago. That's persistent ISR, drones, maritime patrol aircraft, probably signals intelligence tracking radio chatter between IRGC Navy units, feeding targets into a strike package fast enough that the boats didn't have time to scatter. And you also needed air defense suppression happening in parallel because you don't want your strike aircraft getting greeted by whatever radar-guided systems Iran's rebuilt since the ceasefire. That's why the target list wasn't just boats, it was air defense systems, command and control, and coastal radar struck in the same operation. Classic sequencing. Blind the network first, then go in for the actual kill list, in this case, a list built almost entirely around Iran's remaining maritime harassment capability. The anti-ship missile sites on that target list matter too. Those are the systems that let Iran threaten shipping from land without even needing to launch a boat. Truck-mounted or fixed coastal batteries that can range a tanker transiting the deep water channel. Taking those out alongside the boats is the U. S, going after both legs of Iran's maritime threat at once. The stuff that swarms you up close, the stuff that can hit you from the beach. Here's a detail that got buried under all the strike coverage. This entire exchange happened while President Trump was overseas at the NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey. He was literally standing with Turkish President Erdogan discussing alliance business while CENTCOM was running this operation back home. Trump told reporters he'd been very disappointed with how NATO allies have responded to the war the U.S. and Israel launched against Iran back in February, and he downplayed the conflict itself, describing it less as a war and more as a denuclearization operation. Think about the optics here for a second. You've got the commander-in-chief on the other side of the planet, sitting across from NATO leaders, while his military is simultaneously erasing an Iranian fast attack fleet, and Iran is lobbing missiles and drones at American bases in two different Gulf countries. That's the kind of split-screen moment that either shows total confidence in your chain of command, or it's a genuine test of whether things stay contained while the president's attention is elsewhere. So far, it looks like option one. The strikes were completed, the retaliation was intercepted or failed to do serious damage by most accounts, and the ceasefire, battered as it is, hasn't formally collapsed. But don't sleep on the timing. Iran knows exactly when American leadership is distracted with alliance diplomacy on the other side of the globe. Whether that factored into the decision to hit those tankers in the first place is something I'd bet the intelligence community is looking at very closely right now. Our boy Sun Tzu never stops being right, does he? Because if you zoom out, this is the same retrenchment pattern we've watched play out again and again since February. Iran probes, Iran tests, Iran tries to reclaim some leverage in the Strait, usually right around a moment when negotiations are sensitive or a deal deadline is approaching. The U.S. responds with overwhelming, target-rich retaliation. Things go quiet for a bit. Then it happens again. This is at least the second time this exact playbook has run in recent weeks. Back in late June, Iran hit a commercial ship, and the U.S. answered with about 10 strikes on military targets in and around the Strait. Iran escalated by hitting Bahrain and Kuwait. Both sides eventually stood down. Now, here we are again, except this time, the U.S. response wasn't 10 targets, it was over 80, and the boat number alone, 60 plus, dwarfs anything from that prior exchange. That's not Washington losing patience gradually. That's Washington deciding the previous round of retaliation wasn't a strong enough deterrent and doubling or tripling the response weight this time around. And here's the part that should worry Tehran more than anything. The Islamabad Memorandum, the deal signed back in June that was supposed to end this war, explicitly promised a toll-free, unrestricted Strait of Hormuz for 60 days. Every time Iran attacks a tanker, it's not just a tactical provocation, it's a direct violation of the paper its own president signed. And every time that happens, the U.S. has both a military and an economic lever sitting right there ready to pull, strikes on one side, sanctions waivers getting yanked on the other. Iran is testing a rope that gets shorter every single time it pulls on it. So what's the real goal here for Tehran? It's not really about sinking tankers for the sake of sinking tankers. It's leverage. Iran has spent this entire post-ceasefire period trying to establish that it, not the U.S., not Oman, not international shipping law, controls the terms of transit through that waterway. That's why you've seen Iran repeatedly push the idea of charging tolls for passage, setting up its own Strait Authority to register vessels, and insisting on the right to divert ships toward routes closer to its own coastline. Every time a tanker gets hit, it's a reminder to shippers and to Washington alike that Iran can still make that waterway painful, expensive, and dangerous whenever it decides to. The problem for Iran is that this strategy runs directly into a battered but very real navy on the other side of the table that clearly isn't interested in letting that happen. And after last night, Iran has a lot fewer of the actual boats it would need to keep making that point stick. You can declare all the tolls and registration requirements you want on paper. It's a lot harder to enforce any of it when a huge chunk of your enforcement fleet just got erased in a single night. Meanwhile, back home, Iran's leadership is dealing with something else entirely. The extended funeral processions for former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, killed back on the war's opening day in February, with his son Mojtaba, now the nominal Supreme Leader, while reportedly still recovering from wounds sustained in that same strike. You've got mourners in the streets, calling for revenge against both Trump and Netanyahu by name, while the regime is simultaneously trying to negotiate a permanent peace deal with the same governments those crowds want avenged against. That's an incredibly difficult two-front problem for any leadership to manage. Grief and fury on the home front, survival math at the negotiating table. Here's where we zoom all the way out, my friends. The stated Iranian position is still what it's always been. Sanctions relief, an end to hostilities, recognition of some version of a peaceful nuclear program, and now, increasingly, the right to control and monetize the Strait of Hormuz itself. But the actual behavior tells a different story. Every time Iran gets a concession on paper, it tests how far it can push past that concession in practice. Toll-free passage becomes toll-free for now, tolls later. Oh, a ceasefire becomes a ceasefire with monthly exceptions. That's not the behavior of a regime negotiating in good faith toward a final deal. That's the behavior of a regime trying to claw back leverage one incident at a time, betting that Washington's appetite for continued strikes will run out before Iran's appetite for provocation does. Except that bet keeps not paying off. Every single time Iran has tested that theory since February, the U.S. response has escalated rather than plateaued. 10 strikes became 80-plus strikes. A handful of boats became 60-plus boats. The sanctions waiver Iran was counting on to rebuild its economy got yanked within hours of the tanker attacks becoming public. If you're sitting in Tehran doing the actual cost-benefit math right now, the numbers are not moving in your favor. So what happens from here? A few paths. Iran could read this correctly as the writing on the wall, quietly stand down the boat harassment campaign because it genuinely doesn't have the hulls left to sustain it, and let the 60-day negotiating window play out towards some real final agreement. Or the hardline factions inside the IRGC, the ones who've never been fully on board with any deal that doesn't include reparations and a full American withdrawal from the region, could see this as exactly the kind of humiliation that demands another response, dragging the ceasefire back toward collapse. Given how the funeral processions are going right now, with crowds openly chanting for revenge, I wouldn't bet heavily on the calm option winning out cleanly. But I also don't think Iran has the hardware left to make good on any crushing response promises it's making in the meantime. Words are cheap when your fast boats just got cut by more than half in a single night. What do you think happens from here? Does this ceasefire actually hold through the rest of the 60-day window, or are we looking at another full escalation cycle before this thing is really over? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd genuinely love to hear your read on it. Before we wrap up, a couple of things happening elsewhere in the world that deserve your attention, because Hormuz isn't the only story right now. At the NATO summit in Ankara, security in the Strait of Hormuz was reportedly on the agenda for discussions among alliance leaders, which tells you this isn't just a Gulf regional issue anymore. It's being treated as a broader alliance security concern given how much global energy trade actually moves through that waterway. Roughly a fifth of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas supply passes through the strait in normal times. So, when traffic collapses or comes under sustained attack, that's not a regional story, that's a global economic one. And keep an eye on shipping data in the days ahead. Before this latest round of strikes, traffic through the strait had actually been showing real resilience. Over 100 verified crossings in a single recent weekend, which is a long way up from the days when traffic collapsed to just a couple of tankers a day at the height of the war. The real test now is whether that recovery holds through this latest exchange, or whether insurers and shipping companies start pulling back again the moment risk premiums spike. Watch the crossing numbers over the next week. That'll tell you more about how seriously the market is taking this ceasefire than any statement out of Tehran or Washington will. So that's where we're at, guys. 60-plus IRGC boats erased in a single night. 80-plus targets hit across Iran's coastline, sanctions back on the table, missiles and drones flying at Bahrain and Kuwait within hours. And a ceasefire that's somehow still technically standing, even as both sides keep testing exactly how much weight it can hold. What do you think happens next? Does Iran actually stand down after losing that much of its harassment fleet in one night? Or do we see another escalation cycle before this 60-day window is up? Let me know in the comments. I always love reading what you all think. Go ahead and follow me on X. Follow me on Instagram. I'm posting there pretty much every day. And if you want more of the imagery breakdowns and strike footage analysis that I can't always post here, you know where to find me. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one.